Hello and welcome. Today on the Yo Soy Pachamamista channel, we have a spectacular guest, Gil Hedley. The topic of today is on the foreskin and on circumcision, which I realize is quite a controversial topic. And I think it's really important. I want to start this conversation by saying that I in this channel want to accompany people in our mutual pursuit of understanding ever more profoundly our sacred biological design. Like how are we designed as humans? How can we nourish our bodies? How can we move well? And so this conversation is part of that. Like we are in the pursuit of understanding and honoring our sacred biological design. And I want this conversation to be accessible to to men who are circumcised, who are not circumcised, to parents who have chosen to circumcise, to parents who have chosen not to circumcise. So I want to say that right out of the gate that my objective is not to create division. My objective is to pursue biological truth. So with that being said, I want to open the floor to Gil so that you can talk a little bit about who you are and what you dedicate your life's work to, because it's so fascinating. And then from there, we're going to dive deeper into the topic.
Okay. Well, I am a person. I live in the U.S., many different places, presently Colorado. I teach anatomy. I've been doing that for the last 30 years. My background was actually in theological ethics. So I studied philosophical and theological and religious ethics as a graduate student, got my PhD in that, and realized that many of the topics that we talk about in the ethics department have to do with the body. And I realized that we in the ethics department had literally no knowledge and no personal relationship with the body. We were very abstract thinkers living in a very meta world. And it struck me as important that if I were to be a truly considerate ethicist, for my sake at least, I would have to learn more about the body, become embodied, embody my body, recognize the gift that I have been given in my body. And so that interest took me down many roads, including the practice of Tai Chi in grad school. I don't practice that anymore. It included training as a certified RALFer, a structural integration practitioner, a form of body work, which I also no longer practice. But these were all the stepping stones into my study of anatomy in a very deep way in the dissection laboratory, where I've been working for 3 decades now, studying the human form up close and personal with the help of donor gifts, which are to say bodies that have been offered for study and learning as gifts after a person passes, also known as cadavers. So I've done cadaver studies for all these years. And it's been a great education. And I've learned a lot about the magnificent gift that is the human body. And I've worked over the course of my career to try and propagate an understanding of what's there, of what's in the, if this is a present, when you unwrap it, what do you find? You know, what gifts are given there, and what can it teach us about how we live in the world, how we might live in the world? I found that in ethics, we're often giving orders to biology, giving orders to the body, rather than acting as students of the creation, of students of this great gift. And if we do study it, how might it alter the way that we behave or act in the world, towards ourselves and towards others.
I think it's fascinating that you have dissected so many human bodies because I think all the time about, for example, the pancreas or, the location of the small intestines. There's so many things on the inside of our body that really, I'm just like, mm, I'll take your word for it. Like I've never seen inside of a human body, so I just have to take the word of the anatomy book or of the, even doctors, because I'm pretty sure in medical school, they probably have maybe one dissection experience and that's with a big group. And so it's fascinating, right? Because I'm not saying this is true, but what if there were no pancreas, like I've never seen it, but you have, so you can tell us, like it's
Yeah.
very interesting. You have a very, very, very special experience because most people, even medical professionals, do not have the intimacy with the human body that you have.
It's true. And the circumstance under which medical personnel are trained to understand human anatomy in the gross dissection lab is a fleeting experience for them. No doubt a powerful one, but fleeting. I mean, you go into the lab a few times a week for a few months, and then you think you know something, And I'm telling you, you have to look at a lot of bodies to even have your eyes opened to see what's in front of you. We show up with many preconceptions and ideas, and so you often only see not what's in front of you, but what's in your head. And so it does take a lot of experience and practice to start to just see, like, wow, that's what's there. And that's what's there in this body, as opposed to, learning what's in a book and then expecting it to be there and seeing it the way the book presents it rather than the way the human body presents it, because the human body, to my mind, is always right. And the book is just an attempt to summarize something about the human body to point a way to be a beginning point. But the individual, unique human form to me is always the 100% perfect example. And so if I want to accumulate knowledge of the whole human body, right, which is all the human bodies, you have to look at a lot of bodies. You can't just look at one. You can't take your conclusions from a drawing in a book. You have to study over and over again the unique example that is perfect.
One time a woman said to me, she was actually a nutritionist, and she said that basically we should all be following a very, very similar diet because our anatomy is the same. And she said, look, the book, see, we all have this, and so we should. And then literally the week after, I went to see abdominal massage therapist, and she said, nobody is really the same. Some people's stomachs are higher, some people's stomachs are lower. Some people's, intestines are kind of over here. Some people's are over there. Like it's literally in the same week. These two women had such different cosmologies of the human body.
I would run with the second one, and
Yes.
I would suggest that the first one simply hasn't studied anatomy. God bless her, she's doing her best, but that generalization that she made, I would suggest, is patently ridiculous. And I could demonstrate that to her on any day of the week in laboratory or by any example of any human person. What is very particular about us humans is that due to our incredible variability and adaptability on this planet, we change, with respect to our environments, with respect to our families and gene pools and our dietary habits. Deer, they eat grass, I mean, the deer are unique if you look at them very carefully, but there's a certain theme going on there, a certain predictability to the programs that they're running, whereas humans are running near infinite number of programs, and that results in an incredible variety of expression. We can have very different diets, and that will actually change the way our organs look, right? And so it's not about what you're given, but what you do with it, and how that modifies through use.
So, diving into our chosen topic of today, my most fundamental feeling and thought and questioning is, I think one of many other people as well, is that why would God possibly design a body part that needs to be cut and or removed? That just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to me spiritually. It doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't make sense to me physically, spiritually, in any way. And so then I really have to ponder, like, wow, this is so widespread. How could we, it's almost like, yeah, how can we be so far collectively from the truth that God would never, or the universe would never design a body that needs to be cut or removed, especially in the first moments or days or weeks of life.
Yes, that's a puzzle. and what I tend to do when I talk about this topic is to just start with what's given, what's there, before we even get anywhere near what folks do in the face of that.
Right.
And I find that, well, once you start just looking at what's there and what's its function and anatomy, physiology, and immunological import, then you can ask questions,
Mm-hmm.
about why folks do otherwise than respect and appreciate and take care of that, right? So the human foreskin is a given. That's the endowment. That's how the human body is structured. We have eyelids, we have labia, we have foreskins, we have lips that cover the opening of our mouth. We have an anus that kind of puckers closes that opening. We have all sorts of hairs in our nostrils that protect that opening. And we have earwax actually protecting even the opening of our ears. So all our body is all kinds of openings, and they're generally protected one way or another. And the skin that covers the glands, or the end aspect of the penis, is protected by like a draping of skin that gathers in like a puckering around that orifice and protects it in many ways. That is protected. So the glands itself is a kind of a tissue like the inside of your lip. It's a tender and more delicate type of skin than, say, the heel of your hand or your foot. So, and there's an opening there that we urinate out of. And, well, all openings are potentially two-way streets. So we want to have those openings protected from the infiltration of materials from the outside world that could harm us. We put stuff in our mouth like food. All of our orifices at some level are two-way streets. And so we got to be cautious about what goes in, not just how things come out. And so the organization of the tissues of the human body for an infant baby, you're born with the skin draping over the opening of the penis. And that's a good thing. It's very, very helpful. That's like your immune system. So, and that skin, that foreskin, it's not extra. It's not like a bonus. It's not like a spare part. We don't have any spare parts when we're born. So the skin is actually the skin that's there to the penis changes length, right? That's one of its spectacular features, is that it can be small and then it can be bigger, with the change of blood flow to the organ. And so as blood flows to the organ, then it increases in size, and yet it's still covered in skin. As the shaft of the penis grows from an erection, it's still covered in skin. Isn't that a great trick that we have? So the foreskin is the skin of the shaft of the erect penis. It's not an extra part. But when it's in a flaccid state, then that skin covering the glands is a wonderful protection, in that the urine, right? When you urinate, that urine flows around and is a moisturizer. It protects, the uric acid crystals are moisturizing crystals. So they facilitate the health of that skin. And it's a self-cleaning, right? Because in the infant, the foreskin is actually adherent to the glands of the penis. It's adherent. It's still grown to it. All of our organs are immature when we're born, including the human penis. So the youthful penis, the foreskin, doesn't actually retract backwards. It's fixed in position by connections of one layer of skin to another. And so that's normal for the penis to be covered in that way and protected. And as the penis grows, then that skin will slowly de-adhere over years and years. It can be 10, 12 years before the foreskin retracts. It doesn't need to be retracted before then. Prematurely, it can injure the penis to tear the foreskin away from the glands prematurely. That hurts, and we don't want to do that to anybody. So there's the moisturizing aspect, and there's the physical, mechanical protection. But then also the foreskin is the most erogenous zone of the organ, right? So the penis is most erogenous, most best feeling, most loaded with nerves, most excitable is that foreskin. And so it's part of the organization of the human body, that we have areas of our body that are excitatory, right? That feel good. We have intimate zones in our bodies that are loaded with nerves that give a positive sensation. And this is awesome. One of the awesome gifts of the human body is its pleasurable aspects, but those pleasurable aspects, which facilitate our mutual relations, right? Which we can stimulate ourselves, we can stimulate each other, right? So that's the organization of the human body, and that can be scary in some cultures, and amongst some peoples, and amongst some thought ways of organizing one's mind, that pleasure can be scary, and that consequently can cause a fear of those areas, right? And there's a lot of fear in our cultures around sexuality, around sexual feeling and sexual expression. It was very risky and dangerous business from the viewpoint of some cultural conceptualizations of our sexuality. But before we go too far down that road, the sex function is facilitated by the structure of the organ, right, which includes that foreskin. So that skin, once it can retract back to 10 or 11 or 12 or 13, then becomes sort of a covering, but then also it can be an exposing aspect, right? So just like the hood of the clitoris can cover the clitoris or expose the clitoris when it's retracted, similarly the foreskin can cover the glands, the penis, and then be drawn back from it, and it exposes that sensitive aspect. So, and then if it goes back and forth over that repeatedly, then that's stimulating, right? It feels good, that foreskin moving back and forth over the glands, and then the lubricants that come from the urethral meatus there, the bulbourethral fluid, then becomes a lubricant of the foreskin over the glands, and that is the excitatory function that happens during sex, right? So the idea is that the foreskin is moving back and forth over the glands, stimulating the penis, and there's ejaculation as the culmination of the excitation, right? But what the foreskin is also doing is mediating friction between the shaft of the penis and the partner. So that's the design of the organ, is that it can be in the partner, moving, but not abrading the partner. The foreskin protects the partner, as well as provides a stimulatory pathway for the shaft of the penis, for the glands of the penis. So the penis moving within a partner and being stimulated by that skin moving over the glands is very different than a tight skin rubbing against the partner's epithelial tissues, which aren't really designed to endure that so much, right? They're pressure loving rather than friction loving, seems to be the way the sensory nerve fiber endings are designed, to enjoy pressure on the part of the one partner and to enjoy friction on the part of the other partner, but not friction with the partner, friction with yourself. It's very different, right? So it's like, oh, you move really, the penis moves in and out of itself, and the partner's tissues kind of pin that skin in place so that the shaft can move in and out of the skin. So, for instance, in the case of the vagina, the whole vulva, right, focused at the central point of the vagina, there are erectile tissues around the walls of the vagina. There's the clitoris, right, and the vestibular bulbs, which are erectile bodies that kind of wrap and frame the vagina. And as they kind of inflate in excitation, they narrow the aperture of the vagina. And then if there are a penis placed there, right, then that would be a hug. It's like a donut hugging a hot dog. I don't know how to, right? It's like an internal hug. And then the penis moves within and out of its own skin while that skin is being hugged. So that's the design. Now, that's a pretty cool few sets of things, right? It's a highly erogenous tissue. It's protective of the opening of the body. It's protective of the partner. Feels good. Also, while the penis is covered by that foreskin, just like all the skin of our body sheds skin cells, and skin cells at the surface die. They apoptose, they die from enzymes within them, and those enzymes basically kill the cell so that the next group of cells can take its place. Well, this is also happening at our orifices, whether the orifice be the vulva and the vagina, whether the orifice be the urethral meatus of the penis. So as the skin cells shed there on the underside of the foreskin, there's a little accretion or buildup of that dead skin cell material and the enzymes that cause those cells to die. And those enzymes then also become antibacterial, right? Because once they're no longer in the cell, but out of the cell, then the enzymes that are living there in that material underneath the foreskin have also an immunosuppressive or protective function. Not immunosuppressive meaning suppressing the invaders is what I meant to say. So that bacteria can then be killed there. So it's protective, what's called smegma, right? The soapy substance there. And of course, you clean that away so that it doesn't build up. Now, people will say, oh, well, then the foreskin is unhygienic. It could smell or something. And I would say your butthole also smells. If you don't clean it, your mouth, you can have bad mouth odor if you don't clean it. So it is incumbent upon human beings whose bodies are intact to wash at some point, to make ourselves sociably pleasant to interact with. But we wouldn't want to say, well, you should take that away because it could become unattractive somehow. Well, you could also clean yourself. So we're very able to take care of ourselves. So I've been talking for a long time. Do you have any questions from all these words I've been producing so far, Katie?
No, it's been great. It's really important because I like what you said before. We need to understand its function and how it works. It's anatomy and physiology before we then decide why some people might choose to deviate from that.
Yes.
Hide it or remove it. The hygiene, the most common pushback I hear from people is that it's so not hygienic. It's not hygienic. Infection. Your future partner, the woman, she will be infected. She will have cancer because of you. I mean, so it's very, very interesting to me because as a girl, like, when we're little girls, they teach us you have to wipe from the front to the back. That's very important. That's like lesson 101 in the bathroom for a little girl.
Yeah.
So I think for a little boy, wouldn't it be the same? You're taught how to keep yourself healthy.
Yes, and because the foreskin is not designed or meant to be retracted from early on, what's healthy is leave it alone, right? And don't force the retraction. Don't rub soap on the glands. That will make it dry and crack, right? And as a little person, well, you're not having sex anyway, you're not sexually mature. Now, when you do sexually mature and you're capable, say, of ejaculating, then the hygiene protocols change, right? For a more mature person, as they do in general. I didn't have to shave when I was a 5-year-old, and now I shave, as part of my self-care. And similarly, once a boy moving into adolescence and is capable of ejaculating, then it becomes incumbent upon that person to gently clean beneath the foreskin, right? And to retract the foreskin and gently wash away any ejaculate that might accumulated underneath there, and to keep oneself clean. And that's kind of, if your partner doesn't keep themselves clean, well, that would merit a discussion, right? But it's not an intrinsically bad place in your body and somehow nasty. And it tends to be folks, there are certain prejudices, right, against it. And again, it is also true that not everybody has access to clean water and stuff. But it's not a thing against the foreskin itself, but against the whole person is going to be dirty. So, right. So we have to not pick out the foreskin, right? In a circumstance where there, might be some failure in the water system or something. My eyelids produce every morning a weird little crust in the corner of my eyes. We call it the Sandman, right? The Sandman. But I don't cut off my eyelids and leave my eyeballs to dry out because my eyes produce a substance there, right? That would be crazy, right? I don't see anybody cutting off their eyelids, but we're cutting off the foreskin all over the place. It's a strange solution to a problem that can be solved through simple hygiene practices.
And in most of the world, circumcision is not a common practice. In the US, it is.
That's right.
As far as I know, in Latin America, the most common place where it's practiced is Mexico, but that's because of Mexico's proximity to the US. So, and our influence on Mexico. And I think other places, I was just talking to somebody from Colombia, and he was mentioning that it's really only a very upper class thing to do because people of really high economic levels in some places are trying to, for lack of a better word, copy what the US does.
Yeah. And in that particular instance, I have to say that they're going down a challenging road for a number of reasons. But I had one more thought on the hygiene issue, because folks will say it's more hygienic, and I would say it's actually the opposite. So when you cut the penis, number one, you've done surgery on it, and there's risk, right, of infection from doing a surgery just up front. Just the circumcision itself runs hygienic risks. It also amputates nature's protection for that opening in your body. So the skin of the glands begins to dry out and become sclerified or calloused, and the urethral meatus, the opening through which you urinate, is now exposed. So it's actually the opposite of hygienic. In addition, because you've removed the skin of the shaft of the penis, when it becomes erect, it becomes more tight, and it has to actually recruit skin from the pubic area, which is covered with hair. So now you have hair covering maybe even half of the shaft of the erect penis that then gets inserted into the partner. So that's not the hygienic design at all of human sexual interaction. It's actually changed both the mechanics of sex in terms of the friction, and also changed the hygienic, some of the hygienic properties of the penis. So if you were trying to make an argument that circumcision is hygienic, I would say you're confused, and that it's the opposite, actually. And when it comes to other countries copycatting the United States, well, oops, we're laughed at by many countries in the world who are like, wow, why are those barbarians still doing circumcision when why do they do that? And there's certain countries that do it more than others, right? So there's not a mandate for circumcision, but it's common in Muslim countries for men to circumcise, in some Muslim countries, but also in Israel and the United States. It's a sort of the preferred way of working with the human penis, but the reasons for it are very different. So the biblical understanding of circumcision goes back to the Hebrew Bible, where we have the story of Abraham and Isaac and the sacrifice of Isaac and then the rescue of Isaac by the angel of the Lord. And then what we have not soon after in the storyline is the founding of the covenant between Abraham and the Lord, right? So that the sign of the covenant is circumcision. Now, in my interpretation of that as an anthropologist, we're looking at with an anthropology background for college, looks like an improvement on child sacrifice to me. In other words, you can circumcise, you can kill your child as the Abraham and Isaac story, but then it's like, no, don't do that. And then we replace it with like a sign or a ritual scarification, which to me is massive improvement over child sacrifice. But what was the nature of that scar of circumcision? It was the removal of the tip of the foreskin where it overhangs the glands so that the glands would be somewhat exposed, not completely exposed, but somewhat exposed. That's a very different intention than the intention of the kind of circumcision that's practiced in the United States, which is called the stripping of the glands. And the stripping of the glands is the invention of Protestant moralizers in the centuries past in this country, who came over to this country to preach the Protestant religion, Christian religion. And at the time, there was quite a negative relationship with sexuality in the body. They were very down on sex, to put it mildly. And the intention of circumcision on the part of those Protestant moralizers was to truncate sexual pleasure, was to inhibit the sexual impulse through injury, basically. They cauterized the clitoris of young girls and they circumcised infant boys in order to reduce sexual pleasure and, in their belief, make it less likely that they would fall into sexual sinfulness. Okay. Well, I talk to anybody who's circumcised and you tell them, well, that doesn't work. It doesn't improve. It doesn't cure lust and masturbation at all. In fact, it might make it worse, right? Because you kind of have to work harder to have pleasure in your body because the erogenous zone has been removed. And the way you have sex has changed. Now, instead of your skin rubbing against itself, now you have to rub off on your partner, right? So you have to try and find friction against the walls of your partner's body rather than your own. So changes that completely. So the stripping of the glands and the circumcision introduced by Protestantism into the United States actually involves protracting the skin forward of the infant's penis, not just the Abrahamic cutting of the overhanging skin, but to actually pull the skin forward, clamp it with a circular clamp, and then with a cigar snipper type of instrument, snip that skin off so that it retracts, and now much of the skin of the shaft of the penis has been removed, which is a much more thoroughgoing surgical intervention, which has its own side effects and risks that are often underplayed by those who harvest that skin. And we really, it's a different phenomenon, the American style stripping of the glands that was introduced in this country. And then once maybe that religious fervor died down and passed, the practice to which Americans were habituated continued on. And then those Christian Victorian doctors who were doing that procedure, that whole medical establishment began to justify the practice in other ways. This is the most common surgery in the United States. It's a moneymaker. And it's very hard to stop doing something that we've been doing and rationalizing for many years. And I say rationalize because as people say, well, we do it for hygiene, but then when they hear the argument against it as hygienic, then they'll move on to something else and they'll say, well, it'll save you from cancer. And again, there are ridiculous and specious arguments introduced. It'll lower the AIDS rate. It'll do everything. It's a magic panacea for all disease, just so long as you do it. And there's that kind of energy put into it. And that's when you can see it to be a religious belief and not a conscious, not a consciously thought out thing. And I mean a medical religious belief at this point, where the religion of medicine propounds a behavior that can't be justified, but can only be rationalized. So there's really no justification for a circumcision of a healthy infant. Now it's different if you have some injury to the penis, or there's something that's often put forward as a justification is to avoid phimosis. Now, phimosis is kind of strangulation of the penis by muscle fibers in the foreskin that can become over-contracted and then tighten on the glans penis. And that indeed can be a problem, but that problem can be rectified, either by a medical intervention or through various stretching techniques. But it doesn't certainly call for universal prophylactic circumcision that some men will endure that problem. There's all sorts of problems in our bodies if we want to cut them all off at the pass, literally. We can avoid having a knee injury by cutting everyone's legs off at the hips, and you'll never injure your knees. Nothing will ever go wrong with your knees again if you remove them. And we could it's terrible to have sore nipples when you're nursing, and that could be avoided if we simply removed the breasts of all teenage girls. And then we would never have that problem. But wouldn't it be a horrible world that we lived in? And yet somehow when we make such analogies, people think, well, that's crazy, but they don't think it's crazy to prophylactically remove healthy tissue for which there can be no meaningful consent given. You can't give meaningful consent to remove the healthy tissue of someone else's body, right? How would you do that? It's like, I have decided that you would look really pretty if we just took away this little sag in your around your crow's feet. I think you would look better if we gave you some eye surgery. So we're going to do, it's like, what are you talking about? It's crazy talk. And yet when we do the crazy talk of imposing circumcision upon infants and changing the mechanics of their sexuality, changing their immune system, changing their ability to access and their relationship with the gift of pleasure with which their body is endowed, somehow that's okay. It's very strange.
I think about all those little boys like thousands of years ago who unfortunately were born into a culture where they were just starting to figure out that they were going to do that. I mean, oh my gosh, because you had to there had to be quite a bit of casualties in order for them to figure out how they were going to do it. It's kind of like you have to figure out how you're going to do the procedure. But I also think, because someone might say, well, if you do it a less invasive one, it's just a little snip. But I think for a child and a child's nervous system, with everything we know now, and we're learning about how the nervous system functions and our bonds with mother, etc., I just don't know if a little snip is any less traumatic spiritually and physically than a big old snip, you know?
Well, yeah, folks will use language that will trivialize and minimalize circumcision. And you are right. There were certainly many casualties, and the reason why we have in Scripture on the eighth day you circumcise the infant, right, is because if you did it any earlier, they would die from it. They would bleed to death, right? So you don't have the vitamin K and clotting factors being produced in the infant's body until that eighth day. And so if you do it beforehand and don't introduce measures to stem the flow of blood, you will die from it. And so in our modern hospitals where it's done before the eighth day, they have to, chemically alter that person's body as well so that they can stop bleeding. So there are risks to the procedure, of course, as well as snipping off more than you intended. But snipping off a little, snipping off a lot, people say, oh, my baby just went to sleep. And I say, no, your baby actually passed out. They fainted. They were rendered unconscious by the procedure because any physical amputation without anesthesia, you can't give general anesthesia to an infant. They're too young for that too. And so it's up to a doctor whether they even want to introduce, say, lidocaine as a topical cream. But if you're going to take off my pinky with lidocaine, I'm going to poke your eye out, before you get a chance to do it. But the infant is prevented from doing so because they're strapped down to a board. So the infant's body resists the procedure with all of its infant strength. And so they literally strap their arms and legs down to a board, and then with or without lidocaine. So in most instances, it's just an unanesthetized amputation of the most sensitive and erotic skin of the body, which is a very strange way of expressing tenderness and empathy towards another human being, right? So there's an incredible lack of empathy and a disconnection of the normal human impulse towards empathy when you trivialize and that kind of an assault can only be called an assault or an abuse from a certain perspective. We don't allow teachers to slap children around in the classroom, and yet we allow doctors to amputate healthy skin from tender infants. It's a very, and then that skin we haven't mentioned is then upsold into the biologicals market. It's a valuable product that money is made off of. So not only off of the surgery, our parents charge for the surgery, or insurance companies, and they're charged for the disposal of the tissue. And the disposal consists in selling it. So you actually pay them to sell the tissue into the, so you can go on buy neonatal dermoblasts, which is basically the extracts of human foreskin cells, which cell lines are then cultivated, multiplied, and then sold into the market and sold to hand cream companies or face cream companies, etc. So these tissues that are supposed to be unnecessary and worthless are promptly commodified and profiteered upon, much without parents even knowing it. If they knew, oh, we're actually taking this not for your child's health, or not for their hygiene, or not for their anything, we're actually not for their moral health even anymore. When we used to say it was for your moral health, no, it's not for your moral health, it's actually for the health of our hospital's bottom line.
I think it was your video. I can't remember that a foreskin is worth something like $50,000 or something. I don't know.
I did not make that quote. I do not know. It depends on how much skin you harvest, right? It's a more the merrier thing when it comes to harvesting this stuff, because it is kind of a by the square centimeter kind of value. But I couldn't tell you the exact ultimate profit that's made on a given foreskin. I can only assure you, as a point of fact, that not every foreskin, but that is a pathway for human tissues, just as is human cord blood and placentas and any other biological material you might harvest from a baby. Babies have become little profit factories for hospitals.
I think a lot of people would hear you and say, no way, that cannot be true. Because I've had other interviews, about birthing and home births, and I've had midwives bring up this fact that placentas are sold, and I see the comments of that cannot be true. There is no way. I mean, there's definitely a resistance. Not from me, I believe it, but I feel like there is a resistance.
You have to believe me. Just look it up. Human dermal neonatal fibroblasts.
Yeah.
Just look at that. If you think human, that's us. Neonatal, right? Newborn. Dermal, skin. Fibroblasts, those are cells, right? Connective tissue cells that produce fibers. So don't believe me. Go to a catalog of a biological company and look it up. People don't, or watch Oprah, or Oprah had a piece on many years ago where she was having face creams that included foreskins, and there was another one with Steve Harvey. And they were teasing Steve Harvey, who was aghast when they told him that this cream that they were putting on his face was made out of foreskins. And they all made a big joke out of it on both shows. Big joke. Oh, you're so silly, that you would, be put off by that, without ever considering more deeply what is actually being represented there, that babies' tissues have been harvested against their will, which wasn't even expressed or matured, and their healthy tissue was removed and then turned into a commodity. I can't imagine anything more offensive, frankly. But again, don't believe me. Look it up. It's easy enough to look up. It's not far from your fingertips to do a Google search on neonatal dermal fibroblasts.
Is phimosis something that happens usually in adolescence, or does it also happen in boys that are a lot younger? Because when I've posted about this topic, again, that is like a very common thing for people to say. Well, my son had phimosis, but my understanding is, and what you mentioned a few minutes ago, is that circumcision, because it is a surgery, should be a last resort. Like there are softer interventions that would be made for a phimosis case before circumcision.
Yes, and also the fact that some people get phimosis doesn't mean that all people should lose their foreskin, right? That's just bad logic. That take a philosophy 101 course. So the fact is that what is called phimosis by pediatricians in America is not necessarily phimosis even. So they'll say, it's this bad, we're this poorly educated in our medical culture that people don't even know what phimosis is. They'll think that non-retraction is phimosis. And I'm telling you from the start that the foreskin is not meant to retract on an infant. It's meant as a protection, and it is not a mature organ, and it is adherent on purpose. That is not phimosis. But an American pediatrician may be found trying to retract the foreskin of a 2-year-old and say it has phimosis because it doesn't retract. It doesn't have phimosis because it doesn't retract. It has phimosis because it's attached and it's not de-adhered yet, which is a normal process in the development of the organ. So many people will be told, you need to The child isn't circumcised and they're intact, and they'll go to a pediatrician and they'll say, well, the child has phimosis. You need to circumcise them because the foreskin is adherent. You can hear the error there, right? It's not supposed to be. So their misunderstanding of the anatomy and developmental anatomy of the human body leads them to believe that there's something wrong when there's nothing wrong, because they think that should be retracting. They don't even know how it works. They don't understand the foreskin. They don't have one themselves. And so when it's not retracting, they think something's wrong, and they tell the parents the child has phimosis and they need surgery. Actual phimosis is a troublesome problem. It's the strangulation of the glands, not the covering of the glands, but the strangulation of the glands by aberrant connective tissue and muscle fibers there. And again, if you have that, incising the foreskin to release that tension on it would be a possible solution to the problem, but certainly not one that should be invoked on every healthy foreskin. Right. And I've heard fellows say, well, I was 12 and I had to, I don't know the actual medical circumstances, but I had to be circumcised at 12 and it was a horrible thing. I say, well, it wasn't any less horrible when you're an infant. You just don't remember it consciously, right? And why would you impose such a hard? He said, well, all boys should be circumcised because no one should have to go through what I went through. And I'm like, well, they all go through what you went through. Wouldn't it be nice if less went through what you went through? Because not everybody will suffer that particular problem. And as I said before, prophylactically removing healthy tissues is a nonsensical approach to dealing with future potential physical problems. You can get liver cancer too. Should we remove every liver of every baby? What shouldn't we remove? Maybe we should just murder each other at the start and spare ourselves the entire onslaught of the slings and arrows of the human condition, right? We can't protect ourselves from every disease and problem prophylactically by removing the healthy tissue before it gets sick. What if it didn't get sick? Now you never had it. So it doesn't make any sense at all. Like, how do we keep a baby from catching cold? Well, we smother it with a pillow, you know what I'm saying? And it doesn't make any sense. But making sense tends not to be the way people have conversations about this because they're reactive and emotional, right? They haven't stopped to understand the anatomy or the physiology of the human body long enough to consider that perhaps the circumcision that they had or that they did to their child, they might have chosen differently. Now, I'm the last person to tell people to all feel guilty or because you had to circumcise your kid and it was maybe we're not educated. We're not educated about many things that we do that we might have chosen otherwise if we knew more. So I'm not trying to make people feel guilty. It's like, well, that's karma at that point. It happened, and you accept what is, and you work with it. The same thing. I'm not telling young men or old men to be angry at their parents for not knowing better. Well, I assure you, whoever you are, you don't know better about something else, and you're screwing up your own kids about it. So it's not about being angry at people who circumcise you without knowing better, or about circumcising inadvertently and not having known better. I am saying, though, that if you do know better, please consider that removing the healthy tissue of a defenseless infant who could use that tissue to a good end in their sexual life, in their immune function. We might consider that our habits around it are actually formed by misdirections of our intention for profit.
I have this feeling that it's just this thought and feeling that it's it's just such a deep spiritual confusion. It's such a deep, like it's such a deep, we're in general, humanity, it's like we're in this fog. We're
Yeah.
trying to remember who we really are, what we're doing here on earth, what our role is. But I do, not to sound totally conspiracy minded, but it does seem as though it's a confusion and distortion meant to confuse and distort a population. Eh, You know, I,
And what does it do to set up a large portion of a population to be injured in their sex at infancy? And what does it do to the infant psyche's formation and the development of the brain and the programming of our relationship to pleasure
Mhm.
to do that kind of thing? I am curious too, what what that does to our capacity for intimacy and the way that we're intimate. What does it do for our capacity for empathy? What does it do to the infant brain to injure it so at such an early point? I mean, I often sometimes hear from men who are angry. They're really angry when they realize what happened to them. People think, well, nothing ever happened to me. And they don't even know that they were strapped to a board and, and cut, and that aching member was placed in a diaper, and that they cried and screamed over it and had to have that wound washed, and have never actually enjoyed pleasure in that organ the way that it was designed to be pleasured. And people get pissed. And it's sad. And I have to say, well, I'm sorry that happened to you. I can relate completely. And what good news I offer is A, we're humans are capable of forgiving, and that we need to let go and move on once we realize that an injury was done. And then also there's foreskin restoration, which I'm an advocate of. So foreskin restoration is kind of what you're left with once you've been circumcised.
So I want to touch on that, but before it's funny to say, I want to touch on that. I do. I want to touch on that topic, but first, I wanted to say, because I was just really thinking like, wow, we can't even imagine what it's like to be a baby, because the consciousness is so different. Like our perception, our experience of the world is so different. And maybe the only way I could even think about relating to it is I've had quite a few psychedelic experiences,
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
completely in an altered state of consciousness. And I can only imagine that it would be like if you are imagine that you eat a bunch of psilocybin mushrooms and you're in a completely altered state of consciousness at one with the universe, and then someone comes in to clip your genitals. I, I feel like adults, we have, the way that our brains change when we're young and after age 7, etc. I think that it's hard for us to even kind of sort of imagine what it could be like. And that's the only way I can kind of sort of imagine. Like imagine my most wild, far out there psychedelic trip, and that in that moment somebody would come and clip my genitals, like cut me or remove something from my body. That is so profoundly jolting to me to think about. It is just unbelievable.
I I think I admire you for even attempting to empathize with the plight of an infant under that circumstance that way. I think that's great to do because we don't empathize, and for lack of empathy, we injure and harm one another. And so, I mean, a baby is just a feeling creature. They're extremely vulnerable, completely dependent on those around them for everything. And they've just been in the womb, some kind of heaven. And to then have one's consciousness so radically altered, not only by the shift from the womb to the world, as it were, but from the world to that injury is, as you said, what could be more jarring? And I can speak for my own self, having done a few hero's journeys as well. And one of them brought me back to my circumcision. Hmm. And it was an extremely heavy experience to connect to that sense of intense helplessness coupled by an intense sense of betrayal and the kind of rage, kind of just rage, just raw, unfiltered rage at the physical injury, but also the sense of betrayal from caretakers to empathyless injurers. It's quite a devastating and uncomfortable experience to connect to.
Yeah, I just can't imagine it. It's so wild to me. But it's very easy for people to treat infants and old people as though they were not human. It's very common in our culture. It's so deeply ingrained. It's pretty wild. I think because even nice, decent people, right? And I'm not trying to say, oh, I'm the one that's all good. And so, I know that I make plenty of mistakes, and we're collectively, we're remembering, we're in a time of remembrance. Like, we're remembering what it means to be human beyond stories that don't serve us for thousands upon thousands of years, but yeah, just remembering that infants are humans. It sounds so simple, and of course, like, duh, but it's actually, we can observe a lot of the ways we relate to humans, and I think older people as well, and say, woof, maybe we need to, attune some things better,
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah. So
also, I'll just toss this in if I can. Something that folks will mention sometimes when I'm just saying, "Oh, you're talking about what about female genital mutilation?" They'll say, because circumcision is something we just consider normal in this country. Why would you even question it? We speak of people as being circumcised and uncircumcised, as if you're uncircumcised, you're missing something, like you didn't do what's supposed to be done, as opposed to saying, intact. or circumcised or intact. Intact would indicate that there's a wholeness there, and circumcised which means literally to cut around, that you've been cut around, wouldn't necessarily be understood linguistically as preferential. But people say, what about female genital mutilation? And I'll say it's horrific. I stand I stand also for the intact female, absolutely, and 100%. And then I wonder why there are 37 states in the Union that have laws against female genital mutilation, but not 1 in 50 that have laws against male genital mutilation, which is another way to phrase circumcision, male genital mutilation. I don't use that language because it's already so inflammatory to even consider that a foreskin has value. In a culture that circumcises, that to call it male genital mutilation, which is what it is, yet as a word choice for starting a conversation is poor, in my opinion, because it automatically puts people on guard and alienates them. I much prefer to start out with a simple conversation about the actual anatomy and physiology in a way that makes one ask or forces one to consider, well, if it's all that, then why do we cut it off? And that's when the conversation can really begin. Because once you see that this wonderful erogenous protective tissue has a function, and that it isn't there accidentally, and that it's not extra, or as sometimes I've read suggested that it's it's like a vestigial. It's not vestigial. It's not an old organ from another species that doesn't have any use anymore. It's quite stygial. It quite belongs there now and always. It's never been extra. And so when you start out talking like that, then you can kind of get into the conversation a little more gently than if you come out all gangbusters. And there are men's groups who are out there, throwing red paint on hospital doors and stuff. And I understand where their rage comes from. I really do. And I also don't think that you'll get too many people on your side, or too many people questioning what they might do with their newborn infant. From that perspective, I think it's better to just help people understand why this is a valuable tissue, understand that there are also real risks inherent in circumcision that need to be considered before and weighed against whatever values you might think you're bringing to your infant by doing that.
Yeah, in general, with surgery, especially a surgery that alters you for your entire life, you need a really good reason to do that.
Yeah, especially if you're doing it to somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even it ups the ante even more.
I mean, major. I wrote something about, God. My belief is that God does not design, the universe does not design a body that has parts that are just so easily taken out and discarded. And someone wrote, well, the appendix. And I was like, I think we need our appendix.
Absolutely. We need our appendix. We need our tonsils. And there are fashions in surgery that we get over. They put whatever braces on my legs when I was an infant, as they did with many children in the late 50s and early 60s, just like Forrest Gump. Well, that boy is bow-legged. We're going to put these braces on him. It's not bow-legged. He simply hasn't walked yet. So there are fashions that come and go, and this is one of them that I hope will go.
So as we near the end of our time together, I did want to briefly talk about restoration of the foreskin and what that might entail and how that works.
Yeah. Well, what it entails will depend upon how severely you were cut.
Mhm.
So if you have some freedom of movement of your skin over the shaft of your penis, or if the skin accrues at the glands and even comes over the top of it, it's much easier to restore than if in a normal hang length at a normal temperature, there's no loose skin at all, and you're starting from scratch and you have a very tight erection, in which case you have to start with manual stretching, because skin, interestingly, has the wonderful physiological property that when it's stretched, it grows. You grow more of it when you stretch it. And so our bodies are covered in much more skin than we had when we were an infant, right? So our skin can grow along with all of our other tissues, and it can continue to grow like mine is doing in gravity right now, because I'm 60 and my jowls are starting to hang down after 60 years. And they're like, well, what's happening here? My face is falling, and in gravity, it's going towards the earth. Well, so skin continues to grow and change throughout your lifetime. And that can be true also the skin of the shaft of the penis, which can be modified through stretching. So circumferential holding, pulling in opposite directions, hold it for 10, 20 seconds, go to another spot, stretch, stretch, stretch. And as you do that, you will grow more skin in the shaft of your penis to the point where you can actually remodel the penile shaft skin to the point where you have coverage again. And you can restore the coverage of the glands, at which point the glands will slough off those extra cell layers of callus and become sensitive again. So you can actually regrow foreskin through stretching techniques, and you can resensitize your glands as a result of that. So that's cool and amazing, and a potential that many men who have been circumcised have taken up that cause, but it takes time. It's work. I'm not completely there yet, but I'm working on it. Just as not only for my own sake, but just as a gesture to humanity, to say, look what one has to do once one's been circumcised to restore oneself. What a pain in the ass. How about we just don't do that in the first place?
Yeah, I agree. Um, so Gil, thank you so much. I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful for your work and for your passion. And is there anything else about this topic that you think that you want to get in there? Anything else that you feel like we maybe didn't touch on?
Sometimes we fall into the misunderstanding that our body is a problem to be solved or fixed. I would like to suggest that your body is a gift to be opened and explored and enjoyed. And when we come to our bodies with the disposition and thought frame that they're a gift, we have a very different lived experience of our form, and we act differently towards it. So I offer you and all of your listeners that your body is a gift to be explored and enjoyed.
It's a gift that keeps on giving and a gift that keeps on changing.
Yes, guaranteed.
Yeah, guaranteed. Absolutely. Okay, thank you so much. And I'm really grateful that this information is available in Spanish. And I am looking forward to seeing you on your tour when you make it to Tennessee.
Woohoo! Can't wait. Thank
Yes.
you.
Thank you. Bye, Gil.
Bye.